Hello there. Yes, we are.
Hey guys, nice to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, glad to be here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Most definitely welcome.
It
So,
is
what do you guys?
wonderful.
Go ahead,
It is
John.
just wonderful to see you in your environment, and already I feel like you're setting the stage for
Hmm.
our for the presentation. So we're just so grateful.
Well, thank you. We're really excited to be here, and we are really excited to talk a little bit about magic and enchantment for everyone because we're living in this moment, this
Hmm.
time period of revitalization and so much access to resources, both magical and mundane. And we'll talk a little bit about how they overlap in our time together.
Beautiful. Are you going to be able to share some tools on how we can access that ourselves as well?
Yes, absolutely. And
Okay.
we have a little PowerPoint as well we're going to share through if I believe we have the ability to do that. Yes, excellent.
Yeah, you got it. Beautiful. Thank you, Dan Cat. It's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you. All right. So my name is Dan, and of course, this is my wife, Kat.
Hello.
And we are the Eckharts. We're Celebrity Occultists. We work as full-time paranormal investigators, mediums, and we are also lecturers at the School of Occult Arts, which is part of the way in which we met some of the folks here with Portal to Ascension. So thank you again for having us, and we're going to dive into what exactly mainstream magic is and why this offers a realm of enchantment for all of us.
Absolutely. So, magic has become more mainstream and accessible than ever before with the rapid exchange of resources and ideas happening mostly through the internet. Some thought leaders are saying that we might be living through an occult revival, or more broadly, a religious revival, with a growing number of people identifying as spiritual but not religious. There has been a rise in the belief in astrology, growth of Wicca, acceptance of traditionally occult technology such as pendulums and crystals, crystal healing, and witchcraft and magic movies, TV, comics, books, and much, much, much more. Sometimes this is described in a new term called a culture, which focuses on describing millennials and Gen Z people who are really interested in occult topics. So obviously this is very important to us as people who love and utilize and talk about magic all the time. But we also want to explore, well, why is there an increase in occult interest?
There tends to be a conversation point that's offered when we talk about an occult revival or a moment of magic going mainstream, where individuals will respond to this and say, well, you know, the falling rates of those who go to institutionalized religious services, or the failing rates of people who believe in government institutions, all of this coincides with an anxiety. And it's because of that anxiety, because of the uncertainty of the time in which we live, that more and more people are turning towards tarot or crystals or holistic healing or this idea of ancient reevaluation of our origins and where we've come from. And essentially, while I think there may be some truth to this idea that the uncertainty is what propels some to explore magic and meaning, I think it's a little bit of a dodge as well. It's a dodge of the fact that throughout human history, there has always been an interest in the other side, in what happens to us after we die, how we can predict or model the future. And what we found is a discourse amongst those of us who maybe perform magic, who say, well, I'm looking into a possible future by channeling or by reading tarot or by viewing my astrological charts. And those of us who look at different magical technologies or tools like computer modeling or data modeling or data prediction, which we'll get into the etymology of as we move forward. But I think we're all grasping at the same type of technology, just giving it different names.
Absolutely. But like what's important here as well is the fact that there's so much access to this technology. Through the internet, we talked about an exchange of ideas, and greater visibility of
Mhm.
occult belief ideas, and also even aesthetic, which is an important way to kind of propel this forward. But also there's more access to grimoires, these ancient magical texts, and these old kind of papyri or pamphlets or little books, talking about old and magical teachings. So old and kind of, there's a new way to interpret them as well.
And with that new way of interpretation, there comes a new emphasis on finding a path that works for you. There is a new
Mhm.
emphasis on you do not need to be initiated into a tradition like the Rosicrucians or the Golden
Exactly.
Dawn or Aleister Crowley's AA. You don't need that because you can utilize the internet to kind of grab various resources, whether you want to study grimoires or you want to work with a specific occult teacher, or you just really would like to read some channeled texts. You can get them at a very inexpensive rate, and you can pull various pieces for your own unique religious and spiritual stylings.
Yes, that was my path as well as an eclectic witch. And that's a good path to begin when you're getting into magic
Mhm.
and exploring that side of the world. But it's also a fun place to stay, as we'll
Yes.
find out. But there's an occult tool, technique, or tradition for everyone, from crystal moms to 5D humans, trad witches, chaos magicians, druids, and so much more.
Yes, and although we will criticize some of this as we move forward throughout our lecture today, I do want to make it clear that the concept of grabbing from other spiritual traditions or grabbing from other magical traditions is a concept directly integrated into the vast history of magic. So the idea that we have today of preserving an order or preserving a magical lineage, doing this in exactly the same way that the ancients have done it, is kind of a modern misnomer or a modern error in terms of giving more primacy to the original texts than they likely had at their time. Magic as a occulted tradition is a tradition of essentially stealing, as one of my favorite authors says, stealing everything that isn't nailed down and bringing a crowbar to pry up the things that are.
Yes,
So
we say this with love.
we say this with love, and this is definitely going to be something we explore the complexity of. How can we separate techniques and magical tools for their use from their traditions in a way that does not blunt the power of that magical operation or ignore its lineage and spiritual philosophy?
Yes, which leads us into the main kind of thesis of our presentation, the side effects of magic going mainstream. Well, we think mainstream magic has led to less enchantment overall. Now that might be surprising. Like, how does that work exactly? But we think in absence of kind of this metaphysical exploration, the spirituality connection, mainstream magic falls into kind of a default or strictly materialist paradigm. And holding this perspective or orientation to the world alone closes many people off from experiencing the fullness of magical enchantment that usually comes with the study and practice of magic traditionally. If there's any tradition really to point back to. But in this lecture, enchantment, when we talk about that term, we really mean an orientation towards the mystical, religious, or spiritual aspects of our reality, and the ability to relate to the supernatural or paranormal world. So to put that once again, we think that mainstream magic has kind of cut off our ability to fully relate to these kind of spiritual worlds because it is so stuck in this materialist paradigm.
So let's get into exactly what's happening in the mainstream when it comes to this concept of exploring magic. And then what's some of the methodology and some of the tools and techniques that are actually maybe more magical than we give them credence, but the way in which we've talked about them has changed.
Yeah, basically, what does it look like?
Yeah, so mainstream magic, it's a collection of basic popular magic techniques used by both non-practitioners and beginner occultists. And there's a twofold reason for this. One, we're currently living in a paradigm of self-initiated magicians and occultists and witches. The way of knowing that we would have seen in regards to some of the older grade systems, like the Golden Dawn, where you would need to know someone, have a certain social standing, and be invited into that particular order. Those have all gone essentially by the wayside. And while various incarnations of them do exist, and some are even posting some marginal growth, the overwhelming number of people who currently identify as witches or occultists are self-initiated into their chosen traditions. The benefit, of course, being that there are more than ever. However, because there's so much self-initiation, most of the tools put forward, most of the books and occult reference materials are written for purely the beginner mindset and the beginner in mind. They're often all intros. Richard Webster, one of the most published authors from Llewellyn's, has spoken at length about the desire of the publishing company to publish intro level texts, even though he would like to write more advanced level texts. And that's just a market driver. It does introduce us to a whole new window of occult and magical mysticism, but it also limits the depth by which we can explore these topics in a purely in a purely mainstream way. So finding an occult book at your local chain bookstore is very likely going to be an intro level text as compared with something a little bit more demanding or challenging.
Yes. But what does kind of this mainstream or popular magic look like? Well, you've probably seen it. You've seen it in merch. There are things such as witchy makeup, occult subscription boxes, crystal-based fragrances, moon dust juices, and more probably every day. And no shade, because like I would buy this stuff.
Oh yeah, and we want to come out and say we have purchased some of this material ourselves.
And we will continue to do so.
Exactly, because part of the appeal of the mainstream magical moment is also the vibe of being a mainstream magician. What this signals to your social group and your social standing. What kind of insider talk can you use that allows you to signal to others that you are part of their cohort or group? So we see this in merch, but we also see it in unsuspecting places or unexpected places like corporate 9-to-5 jobs, the spaces where we would generally say magic is unwelcome, given its, kind of woo-woo or dismissive the discourse around it in our current moment. However, in a corporate environment, we have corporate mindfulness sessions, even groups like Amazon now instituting mindfulness corners and small meditation closets where people can go and do some controlled breathing to help regulate their autonomous nervous system. There's also, of course, the corporate logo, which many authors who talk about chaos magic and sigils have correctly identified the logo as being a form of sigil. The more people who see the sigil, the more powerful that sigil becomes. Well, the same is true for a logo. The more people who interface with Starbucks or Target and see that red target or that green mermaid begin to identify that symbol with power. They begin to identify that symbol with a certain form of meaning making. And the more that symbol is shared, the more powerful the symbol itself becomes, being Starbucks as an organization. So we see the usage of sigils. We see the usage of magical techniques within marketing. We see the way in which a corporate environment identifies the need for mindfulness training or meditation within their employees in the way that it improves their lives, sum total. However, it comes with a divorce from the greater spiritual teachings of those same methodologies. There's an excellent book for those of you who are interested in some outside of the class reading called McMindfulness that explores the way in which mindfulness meditation, although it has exploded in popularity over the past few years, has done so in a very controlled way that limits or removes the conversation around meditation from the conversation that would be tied into those texts if they were practiced in their spiritual place of origin. So we cut out the things that look too woo-woo, like chakras and consciousness and the afterlife and the beyond, and we're left with some regulatory breathing techniques. And while those regulatory breathing techniques do work to relax us, and they can bring us into a greater state of consciousness, their tool is, the function of that tool was essentially meant to access higher planes of consciousness, to do that portal to ascension, right? To unlock the forces of Kundalini, or to move your energy in an effective way.
Transcendence.
So we're kind of getting like a light beer version of our actual metaphysics and our spiritual traditions and the true power of these techniques. We're getting the lightest possible version of that in these more materialistically minded spaces.
Yeah, and that is mainstream pop magic. I also want to point out here before we move on to our next topic is the Bluetooth logo.
Yes.
People like to hear that it's actually a bind rune, so a ligature of 2 or more runes.
Yes. And this doesn't just extend to, okay, some magical symbols like runes or a sigil itself, or mindfulness breathing. Things that are often considered not spiritual, but are wholly grounded into a kind of body quantified materialism would be movements like biohacking, the quantified self movement, where we essentially take as much scientific data about the human body and put it into a spreadsheet and attempt to manipulate it for optimal performance.
Yeah, there are a lot of apps there that do that work for you. That
is, in its essence, a magical technique, again, divorced from its spiritual component. There's quite, I would argue, quite a great deal. I would say the majority of historical magical literature is not purely about escaping the physical realm and speaking with angels and kind of exploring the astral space. The majority of it is about like everyday workaday scenarios. How do I protect myself? How do I heal this illness? How do I feel healthier? How do I increase my own stamina? All of these things, which the average individual would need to interface with, that they would need for their daily life, was found both through a physical exploration. So we can see here the marriage of like martial arts with a Buddhist philosophy undergirding that, or a herbalist approach of building out herbalist tinctures, where we have an actual serum or medicinal component that's wedded to a spiritual component that's doing something greater within the body. So I would argue that biohacking is honestly a form of magic and enchantment, where even though we're looking at it on spreadsheets, it is still utilized to create change within the body, to create change within your experience, to become more focused, to have more of an exploration of your conscious ability. However, to appeal to that market demographic, we have excised all things around the spiritual component of this, the spiritual modality, the greater sense of astral travel or communication.
Well, and I think what's funny is many biohackers end up getting to that place anyway. But I think what relates it to magic, in addition to everything you just said, is also that kind of trying out and implementing kind of like these cutting edge or unproven scientific research. They really try to, I think it is kind of occult technology.
It is an occult technology.
When you're talking about like grounding mats, magnet healing, using orgone accumulators, all these things to kind of embrace the very cutting edge research we have about how to improve our lives as humans.
One of the current individuals who I think would be at the forefront of a kind of metaphysical biohacking would be Wim Hof, the Iceman, and you can research a little bit about him, but he's an individual who found he can regulate his body temperature through breathing. That's the way it's pitched. However, he had discovered and then repackaged for a modern audience tumo breathing, a Tibetan Buddhist technique of meditation, which raises the core body temperature and manipulates energy and helps burn through the various levels of chakra blockages. what he found was a way to package this for endurance. And so his methodology of marketing is to say, this will help you be more focused. It'll help you be more clear-minded. It'll help you do feats like, you know, walk through the snow barefoot and exert more control over your body. The funny thing to me is that is expertly identified with Dion Fortune's definition of magic, which is the art and science of causing reality to conform with our will. And I like that Neil mentioned science earlier in this conversation and this kind of quantum unfolding, because that is what magic is. It is a principal philosophy of a science. It is a grimoire is a scientist's notes as they describe what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. He's really called the Iceman?
He's really called the Iceman.
Wow, look that up. That sounds really interesting.
The last thing they think I want to mention here is the manifestation YouTube channels, which again, we're seeing that kind of grab the thought component of this, the belief, the quantum shifting. We're attaching these very scientific and materialist terms to a process, and then leaning into it in such a way to bring about, you know, whatever it is you're visualizing, whether that be a new car, a job, and most of them are oriented around physical things like beauty, jobs, cars, money, etc.
And they're pulling from a variety of different traditions, right? Kind of an eclectic way as well. We skipped over like the chain bookstore occult reading sections, but Dan kind of already mentioned that with Richard Webster talking about the publishing industry wanting only intro books, very light treatments of magical subjects. But finally, we want to close out with magic in the mainstream. We have to talk about witch talk. It was a big topic a couple years ago. It's still kind of going as one of those strongly represented communities on social media of these beginner witches. So this community is actually the forefront of magic discourse right now and education in an app that is fed by controversy, canceling, and high negative emotions. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. We have a lot of information out there about magic, but what is the quality of that information? So there are lots of how-to videos, kind of ambiance, witchy aesthetic videos, and overall readings for the community and everyone, really. It's
important to also note that this conversation, by the nature of it happening on TikTok, which is an app most popular with the Zoomer demographic, the witches, occultists, magical practitioners, philosophers who are using the app are generally much younger in age than the traditional concept of an adept magician would be if we were talking about individuals who wrote about magic during the neo-pagan revival. So rather than having Margot Adler talking about drawing down the moon, it's generally a 20-year-old Zoomer who has found magic through those occult bookstore or chain bookstore occult sections, and then teaching others what they've learned. The benefit here is we are seeing a huge community of witches and magical practitioners growing and exploding and trying new things. The negative to this, of course, is that there's a decided lack of guidance from what we would call like lineage practitioners. It's
which
current,
is, you know, again, double-edged. Like, we love the accessibility.
Yes.
But like, what are the kind of side effects of that? And it's currently at 28.4 billion views as of a couple days ago.
Yes.
That witch talk hashtag. So as Dan said, this is the place where people have discourse, but they also talk about these really difficult and muddy topics on ethics, such as consent in magic, what techniques are free to use for everyone versus what is appropriative, and what is safe to do in magic. And it's difficult to have that conversation in very short blips.
Yes, it's difficult to have that conversation without a breadth of practice behind you as well, or access to historical texts which maybe solve the problem that you're already working on.
All right. So that's mainstream magic.
Yeah. So if we were connected to our origins, and this is where we get into the magic connected with metaphysics and spiritual origins.
So one side effect, as Dan kind of mentioned already, was that kind of eclectic witch growth, that solitary practitioner. So a lot of people are practicing alone without a kind of lineage or a coven or a teacher that they trust. So this group is growing and pulling from many different sources and traditions, and there's a lot of value in this, and clearly it is very popular. It just keeps growing and growing. There is less emphasis on metaphysical background of this magical practice. And resources cater to what works, broadly speaking, practical and easy magical techniques, and magic that takes little investment in time and effort to accomplish. So the emphasis tends to be on results, on manifestation and spell work for an individual, rather than kind of hearkening back to kind of the spiritual origins and the benefits from that kind of delving deeply into what makes up our world and how do we interact and how does the universe kind of experience itself through our lives. There's not so much of that, which used to be a huge benefit to being a magical practitioner.
As we've kind of explored witch talk as a subdivision of a greater social networking platform, hashtag witch talk being a subcategory, a hashtag set, I think that's a great model to show us how magic is compartmentalized by modern practitioners. So we have individuals on Witch Talk saying, this is how I do magic, but then compartmentalizing it entirely from their life into that magical space. As Kat mentioned, the history of exploring an occult philosophy was truly one of philosophy, finding an undergirding principle philosophy that moved all of life forward, a kind of base code of the entire universe. And as that work shifted, as society stepped into the Atom Age, this hard divorce between materialism and spiritualism begins to, I think, mirror the divorce of the mind-body connection. And so we don't have a good framework currently for discussing metaphysics as anything other than a compartmentalized or undiscovered science. This idea that magic is currently, we talk about it in quantum terminology, but if you look at books from the late 1800s into the 1900s, their conversations around magic are all tied to this concept of ether. Ether was a materialist scientific concept of the time that, while we could argue has been disproven, looks a lot like quantum methodology today. The quantum methodology just has more specifics, but that idea of a universal underpinning substance of something is a core component between ether and quanta. As we try and grapple with using that term, materialism sort of moves the goalposts. So as soon as magicians and occultists start writing about ether, the scientific community says, now ether isn't it, we're in the quantum realm now. And as now we talk about quantum realm and quantum mechanics and quantum computing, the scientific realm on the cutting edge is beginning to move away from this idea of quanta, understanding now that dark matter exists and that perhaps there's something even more strange and lurking beneath the purely scientific realm. This makes it really hard for us to integrate magic in a way that is truly holistic and truly enchanting.
Yes, and that kind of leads to a few different problems. Can we go back?
Oh yeah,
actually?
Oops.
Which, wow, nice maneuvering there.
Thank you.
Including witch talk hexing the moon, which is a thing that happened. We generally wouldn't do something like this if we had kind of an integrated view of how to relate to the universe, the planets, and what magic is. So some popular or mainstream magic leads to some absurd places and contrary to most magic traditions, such as hexing the moon. It also leads to kind of confusion about what is or is not dangerous. Can you open a portal by looking into a mirror? Is a Ouija board inherently dangerous? If I say something wrong during a ritual, will I accidentally summon a demon? all these things have been asked of us online. We do show up on Witch Talk ourselves. But to say answers overall vary is an understatement. It's all across the board. And there's a real fear and concern here with kind of this lack of information on this kind of deeper level for this mainstream magic. There's also a lack of complexity in addressing gray topics, of which magic has plenty. Malefica or hexing being a good example of that. How do we talk about ethics in magic? There's no easy and simple way to address this, what's sometimes called black magic as well. So people are addressing it as quickly as possible. They're saying, oh, this is absolutely bad and there's nothing, there's no way to move forward in this, and saying this is absolutely dangerous, and information is kind of all over the place.
Exactly.
And there's also kind of a difficulty in how people know how to interact with spirits without any sort of context. There's a lot of confusion out there about how we, the rules of engagement when engaging with ancestors, angels, demons, entities, literally any spirits. And this kind of comes from, the question of who do we trust as an occult teacher? What traditions can we turn to help us know what to do in relating to the spirit world?
I really liked what Joan said at the beginning of this entire talk about the ideas around individuals seeing UFOs or extraterrestrials as beings, while we in a Western kind of materialist scientific mindset see them as they must be from some other dimension and have come here in a nuts and bolts craft of some kind that maybe crashed in New Mexico and the government has it now. That is the way of thinking that is permeating current magical discourse in places like Witch Talk. And we see a rejection of a holistic approach, which leads to some weird places. Some folks on Witch Talk or modern practitioners will say, well, I'm not interested in communicating with angels because I'm no longer a Christian. And so angels mean nothing to me. I don't want to talk about it. I want to work with demons. The problem is when we look at this from a historical context, angels and demons are rooted out of the daemon, this Greek concept, and they're the same thing with different vibrational patterns. And if we're interested in UFOs, it might be an interesting concept to try and conjure a contact with a extraterrestrial being or extra-dimensional being by using Solomonic magic traditional tools. It may be a fun experiment to try and contact that cryptid like Bigfoot using your Ouija board. And what's interesting is when the individuals begin to use complex or holistic tools from other traditions to communicate with things we classify as this materialist silo, this just a Bigfoot, just a UFO, just a cosmic consciousness, just a spirit, we lose the ability to engage with those things in a more meaningful way. We see them as simply one thing.
I think you brought up vibration.
Yes.
That's a huge thing. That's been around for hundreds of years. It's not just the 1900s. The concept of everything having vibration is a Hermetic philosophy tenet. And it's also really how we used to relate to spirits as well, as you kind of said very quickly. Angels being distinct because they have this higher vibration, and demons or daemons being lower, having lower vibrations. But
and the way that ties into
this?
Right, and the way this ties into manifestation, where people say, well, like attracts like, you need to be in the right vibration to attract the money or the car or whatever. That idea of right vibration, literally the term law of attraction, comes from Andrew Jackson Davis, who was a séance practitioner.
Medium,
And what he was trying to understand was why, as a medium, when he was feeling bad, he had bad experiences as a medium, or negative spirits would show up. That tool, when we plug it back into the wall, so to speak, when we put it back to where it came from, really helps us understand the co-creative element of spirit communication. So why do the neighbors or the others show up in Mexico, for example, as beings, but here they show up as gray ETs that are going to probe us. Well, maybe that explains something about our own place of vibration and our own law of attraction, what we expect to see versus what actually is.
Yeah, and that actually is a great example of the last point, which is magic without context or metaphysics is lacking in the ability to recognize or understand spiritual experiences or the supernormal or the paranormal, as we've just been talking about. Okay.
And part of this comes from trying to win at materialism. So what do we mean by this?
Yeah, I mean, if we have to work within this paradigm or perspective, we do lose some of the value of magic. So capitulating to materialist philosophy often erodes what can be helpful, medicinal, and important about magic or the craft.
We see this most in conversations that pop up on Witch Talk, where individuals are saying, oh, yes, I'm a witch. But what that means is, I don't know if I really believe any of this, such as I don't know if I believe that there are spirits, or I don't know if I'm really doing anything to manipulate reality based on my will. I don't know if I'm actually having any conversations with ascended beings or extraterrestrial beings, etc. I think this is just spicy psychology, and it's fine, and that works for me. We kind of see the foundation of this being established back with Jung and Freud, where Jung is doing all of this occult work, but doesn't really want to call it that, and certainly doesn't want to promote it. And he is trying to work from a place of a philosophical wholeness, of looking at the person and the mind as an integrated unit. Where that's left us has been in a magical world with folks who are sure everything is happening within their own brain, or if they're not sure of that, at least not wanting to sound like they're wacky when they talk with their friends and relatives about being a magician or a witch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Pete Carroll, as the chaos magician, initially did try to, he advocated for fitting magic into a materialist perspective. However, over the course of his life as a magician and writings, he decided and promoted magic as something that does connect to the spiritual. So shifting perspectives from a strictly materialist paradigm. And I think that's necessary to look outside of that for magic that really enchants the world.
Because that really is the undergirding reason to explore occult work. Magic is successful when it can provide more than just manifestation results. And there's no problem with using magic to manifest things. Like, it works, it's great, it's exciting, and that's a lot of fun. However, when we look at like the real great work of magic, to borrow from Crowley here, the great work is the work of the self and ascending to some higher space, some higher consciousness, finding gnosis, but also then using a generative component of that gnosis. Crowley writes, of course, that the magician is not truly like an adept until they've created some sort of work out of their magical work, some sort of physical work. Alan Moore, the author, artist, and ceremonial magician, has written at length that the greatest work that's come out of occult groups, whether that be the Golden Dawn or the Agape Lodge or Thelema or even Wicca, the greatest actual result of that work has been artistic, has been books, and has been philosophical treatises, and has been paintings, and has been creative ways of thinking around solving problems. Mitch Horowitz, author of Occult America, writes about FDR's political cabinet being made up of individuals who at their time people thought they might be cranks, some of whom were directly tied in with occult and had occult backgrounds and occult philosophy undergirding their work. And
yes, please read Mitch Horowitz's, all his works, but Occult America, because there's a lot there about the history of the United States and occultism. Yeah, after that shout out.
Yes.
But we need to recognize the value in non-materialist perspective in interrogating and relating to the more than human world, as some call it, the kind of spiritual, and experiences with psi and mediumistic phenomena.
Because as we explore magic in a deep way, we find a true panpsychic or animist experience within the universe around us, that there are beings, as Joan perfectly said, and that there are consciousnesses tied to these things that have not simply just things to teach us, but it changes the way in which we relate with the world proper. If I believe that there is a spirit to the grass, or I believe that there is a spirit to the place in which I live that has things to actively converse with me about, I'm going to treat that space far differently than if I see it as a bulk materialist mechanical input.
I just saw a picture online. I think it was this morning, where someone said, waking up and realizing that I don't live in a Studio Ghibli movie, and I live in the real world. Well, under this perspective of enchantment, you can kind of live in a Studio Ghibli movie. Of course, it's not going to be a beautiful animation, but you are going to be able to shift your perspective to see the spirit, the higher consciousness in everything, and experience this kind of connection with the more than human world.
So we need to recognize the value in the non-materialist perspective in integrating the more than human world and experiences with psi and mediumistic phenomena. So lastly, how then do we find this enchantment, right? So we've talked about enchantment. We've talked about, the dangers of maybe separating these things and where that leads us. But what's the point of having enchantment? Like, why are we even searching after this?
Yeah, that's a kind of a good broad question.
It is.
I think there's a way of relating to the world, and that really acknowledges the expansiveness and the profound weirdness of the universe. And if you kind of deny that side of the world, of course, there's a lack of enchantment, but there's also a lack of acknowledgement of a lot of very human experiences with UFOs, experiences with shadow people. We have someone coming up that's going to be talking about that. When we ignore this part of the world and have no means to which interrogate and understand these supernatural experiences, then we really cut ourselves off from the fullness of the human experience.
And we see the results of that when we do, for example, mindfulness meditation using an app. There's nothing wrong with using mindfulness meditation apps. We've used them quite a bit. We like them. But if all we're ever doing is scanning the body and becoming aware of it, that is a helpful and healing tool as we suffer from this mind-body divorce of like my body just moves my head from room to room.
And in the United States, we're very disconnected to our own bodies generally.
However, we do see that after the end of people like working with that sort of modality, if the end result is simply I can be more productive at my job, that is a result, and it is a magical one. That was what their will intended. However, if we can plug in our chakras, if we can plug in astral travel, if we can plug in personal gnosis through that manipulation of the body and breathing and mind, we can come to really creative and exciting places that maybe provide solutions that we weren't even looking for. It puts us in touch with the sense that we can control more, and we can control more in a productive way when we're understanding the philosophy and spirituality of these tools.
Yeah, we can ask for more.
We can ask for more.
Magic, but engage with magic beyond manifestation or results-oriented focus, or being more effective in some way. We can engage with it as a set of tools to relating to the world on a different level, and asking for it to bring us into a deeper connection and relationship, even if we want, with the spiritual and material, mundane and sacred, natural and man-made, self and other.
So some easy ways to do this. of course, is being aware of yourself, that mind-body connection, but also explore with using metaphysical tools or occult tools like pendulums or tarot cards or astral travel or summoning and binding entities with crystals, and plug them into the actual mundane, plug them into the material. If we build an orgone accumulator, measure over the summer how much rainfall there was in your space and see if it equates to like the National Registry of Rainfall. See if there is an actual benefit to utilizing these occult tools in spaces that aren't just purely spiritual, psychological ones. Can you keep your boss in his office if you draw a pentagram on the floor pointing back to his office? Can you manipulate the results of your sales figures by integrating sigils? Can you talk with Bigfoot using your Ouija board?
Yes, you are the scientist, you are the observer. And it used to be said that alchemy is a dangerous game. I think life is a dangerous game when you think of it that way. You are the one kind of orienting your own path and trying out different techniques and tools for making your life better. And I think that leads into our final point, which is embracing magic, not just what is popular or easy or mainstream, but embracing what is supremely different and maybe even subversive.
Sometimes we tend in our communities, whether we're witches or occultists or UFO hunters or Bigfoot hunters or ghosts and paranormal explorers or folklore historians, we tend to look down our nose or dismiss others who are being a little too weird, right? Like, oh, well, the Eckharts, they're mediums, but they're talking about orgone accumulators. That's nonsense. I don't believe in that. I believe in Bigfoot. The fun here is recognizing that we are all kind of dealing with this nonsense. We are all kind of dealing with this truly absurd, and I mean that in the best possible way, truly weird encounter with something outside ourselves. And giving ourselves the freedom to play with that great work and to treat it in a fun way does unlock some really exciting places where we go. It does give us better context. So if the alien shows up in your bedroom late at night, there's a different way of engaging with that entity or with that being or with that creature than maybe we would have had we simply just been reading a lot of UFO literature. Maybe there's a way that is arguably even more healing for our conscious selves.
Yes, so ask more of magic. Go beyond the intro texts in subjects that you're interested in and find really trustworthy and amazing occult teachers. You'll be able to find them online, thankfully.
Thankfully. So we're going to stop our share here. And if anyone has any questions, we're happy to answer them. I want to thank Neil and Joan. We really appreciate being allowed to come here and open up a portal of ascension for the day.
Thank
you opened up a portal for sure.
Yeah, that was so incredible. So full circle. You know, you were saying that you wanted people to have a holistic approach to magic rather than the mainstream. That was a really predominant theme right there. But then what you did was really provide us context. Not only did you take it to the interdimensional realms, UFOs, but you also brought in the science behind it all and kind of like showed how was that. So yeah, your mission of bringing a holistic, I just got to let you know, it really came across clearly. So thank you.
Good.
And left me with a lot of questions.
Yes.
Because in some ways, I think it's so much about semantics and the wording. You know, because honestly, I'm sitting here with my pendulum. You know, did I ever think of it as an occult tool? No. Okay.
Right.
I think of it as a consciousness tool. So I'm beginning, you know, in the orgone treatment, I think of it as a consciousness, a spiritually aware tool to use. And so I'm getting that semantics is huge here.
Yes, linguistics is my favorite hobby horse when it comes to magic and the occult. And I don't know if it was you, Joan, or no, Henry says, why call it magic when it sounds like a component of spiritualism? As a spiritual teacher, I see the similarity. The connotation with the words magic and witches is negative. And yes, I totally understand that because it's a linguistic response. And the crazy thing about language is language actually directly influences the way we can see the world, the way we can experience it. So as we play with these terms and get real clear on the specificity of those terms, then we can begin to unlock, like, why is witch negative? Why is witch negative, but spiritualist medium is not? Why do, evangelical Christians go and see mediums when maybe that shouldn't align? Like, these are some really interesting questions that we begin to play with.
They're different perspectives as well. And perspective shifting is very useful in having a greater experience of the world.
This is also why John Michael Greer, who is a occultist arch druid in America, writes about the importance for people studying magic and occult and esoteric topics, also studying other languages and finding the ways other communities and cultures talk about your same experience.
And then I noticed too, one thing is that, there's people who play with energy, or dabble, and then there's the adepts. And that I really heard you, people who take this to a higher level of training where they create their own kind of magic. And so I see an end game in a certain way too, an awareness. Very interesting, right, Neil?
Right,
so
definitely. What really stood out for me, a lot of stuff stood out for sure, but definitely the whole component of mindfulness, in the mainstream, and how that's really created this limited expression of what is possible through these modalities, right? And a great example is yoga, right? Which is like pretty much, and it's interesting, even the spiritual yoga in the West truly isn't the original yoga, because the yoga moves are only 100 years old, and yogic philosophy is 7 other limbs besides the 8th limb of asanas. So we're not even when it comes to yoga, we're not even focusing on what it really was all about originally.
Right. We're getting a benefit, which is a health and wellness benefit, but we're not getting there's so much that's still untapped. So I'm never going to discourage someone from doing yoga, but what else is there behind the yoga? What happens when we read these yogic practitioners talking about these other 7 limbs?
Yeah. See, and that goes into the whole subatomic quantum world that you were talking about. So I like to, if we were to give it 2 labels, we'd say the Newtonian mindset, right? Atomic, physical, and then the subatomic mindset, metaphysical. I did a presentation before where I did like a comparison between metaphysics and quantum physics. And to me, metaphysics is metaphorical quantum physics, because you have like singularity in quantum physics, you have oneness in metaphysics, you have realm in metaphysics, you have dimension in quantum physics. It's pretty much one and the same. So we're getting to a point now that we need to shift out of this Newtonian mindset and start realizing, like, we can be like Neo in the Matrix when we start tapping into these abilities. Because if the fact is you're not a solid being, but I'm engaging you in a solid fashion, what else is possible? What does that really mean? People don't have the capacity to really think philosophically about that. That goes into the conspiracy of all the stimuli we have around us and stuff. But so just wanted to share that with you.
Love that. Thank you.
So appreciate you bringing this energy. And so tell people how they can find you and what you're offering them.
Yeah, so you can find us at theeckharts.com or at the.eckharts on Instagram or at the.eckharts on TikTok. And we, of course, explore all manner of spirituality and magical practice through one of our primary works, the School of Occult Arts, which is an online educational platform where we do a lot of these lectures. And we work with a co-facilitator, Isabel Rizzo, who's an internationally recognized art witch. So we have a lot of fun there, and that's a great place for people to kind of come into our world. Otherwise, we work with people on one-on-one basis. We do readings, and we also have some really great retreats. And of course, you're right, Kat.
We have podcasts.
We have our own
Everyone
podcast, Celebrity Occultists. You can find it on SoundCloud.
Celebrity Occultists.
Your energy together, the way you present together, is really amazing. So I'm curious, like, how did you guys, just as the last question here, how did this even happen? How did you guys even get connected? Do you guys nerd out about magic stuff at the dinner table?
All the time. All the time.
You practice magic on each other?
Of course, all the time. It is our full-time job. It is our life, and we love that. We met in college. We met on the first day of college, and weirdly, we like to think that we manifested each other. And also, after doing some exploration, we're beginning to feel like maybe there's really some past life kind of connection here as well, which has been a slow going process as we've kind of both absorbed more of this this information and this like weird philosophy of the occult world and of the metaphysical world.
I see how our worlds overlap, because we too are exploring our past lives.
Ah, good.
Well, like fun. Neil and I work together. I've been looking at different places we've worked together around the world in other lifetimes. So there's so much that overlaps. Very fascinating, and I so appreciate your work together.
Oh, your
thank you.
Essence. We're so glad to be here.
Yeah, we're so glad to be here. We hope everyone else has an amazing lecture, and we can't wait to watch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.